In the Newsroom is a production in partnership with Studio Stillwater. Every week, journalists from the Stillwater News Press invite listeners to join us in the newsroom and hear the story behind the stories. Hello and welcome to In the Newsroom. I'm Beau Simmons, editor of the Stillwater News Press. Joining me today, city editor Michelle Charles.
Hey.
Summer intern Sam Hutchins.
I'm back.
Hey, Sam's back.
Hey, Sam.
So yeah, we're missing Ashland. Chase couldn't make it in, so it's just this trio. How's it been going, Sam?
It's been good. It's been good. I'm trying to figure out. Doing my mental calculations, and I don't have too much time left here either. So I'm trying to figure out my next step, and I think I'll be doing a church camp and going up for a vacation to Florida. So I'm kind of my next few weeks before school starts back up could be even crazier than the internship, but it'll be fun.
Right on. What do you already have sort of your areas of study plugged in for the next semester?
Yeah.
That you're going to be working on?
Yep, and it'll be great. These last couple semesters I've felt pretty swamped. I almost bit off a little bit more than I could chew with classes and stuff, and I lost my 4.0. not too. It didn't dip too badly, but I lost it. And but I figured that was all right. That's almost something to get off my chest. And all right, I don't have to necessarily strive for it super hard anymore. But I wanted to keep writing and stuff, and with all the classes, so I had a bit of a stressful semester last year. So this next semester, this internship will count as a class, and I only have 3 classes next semester. So I'm really looking forward to it. And they're all journalism-based, which last semester I think I only had 1 journalism-based class. So I tend to find those, my work overlaps with them a little more. So sometimes you can use work for a assignment, so that helps. And they're just generally a little more fun, I think. So I'm excited for next semester.
So did you knock off a lot of the requirements then in the first couple of years?
Yeah, I say we, talking about my identical twin, we did a lot of kind of CLEP work a little bit in high school too, so I came in not having to do some credits, and we did some concurrent work, so coming in I only had a few of those, stereotypical 150-person classes learning about American history or, biology or things like that, so I got a lot of those knocked out, and I don't think I have any more non-journalism classes now.
Wow. That is cool. And
that really is.
I mean, especially since, I'm sure it was tough, just like it was for the public school students, K through 12, and you're in college and you're taking mostly things online or virtual or however they called it. But it's a little different when you're a journalism major, isn't it? Or when you get to sort of work on that paper, then you still sort of have like a community, So, what was your experience? Were you still pretty active in the what is the Ocali?
Yeah,
right?
yeah, That's a good point you bring up. You can't really do a physical job when it's COVID and social distancing, but I learned how to interview people over the phone, and I kind of grew up with that a little bit. I really started working super hard in writing and stuff last semester, so that was kind of when COVID hit is the overlap. So I almost grew up on it a little bit of Zoom interviews and stuff. So I like to think I got pretty comfortable with those early on, though I'm still not a huge fan, and I like in person. But yeah, there were plenty of stories to tell last semester, and so that made it interesting. And even for a sports writer like me, or primarily sports, where sports are getting shut down and my summer was pretty quiet, there was always news going on around sports and what got canceled and what's happening and ramifications of each decision. So,
well, that's another thing. A lot of sports, especially at the college level, fewer credentials, so they probably couldn't assign as much to you as far as who got to go to a football game or basketball or something like that. So, what was your beat? I can't remember.
And that's one thing. That's a perfect example you bring up. Last semester, I was only a sophomore. So, but the leadership we had at the Ocali, they were planning on having a couple primary football beat reporters and then a couple rotating passes where they could get people like Ben and I who they thought you'll probably be covering the sports beat or you'll probably be covering football someday, but you'll want to learn a little first and kind of start casually. So. We had a couple passes, but those were kind of the victims to COVID. And, when you need to reduce the seats by half in the press box, everyone kind of gets cut in half more or less. And So that was kind of the victim was the bigger sports. A lot of the smaller sports that I covered a little bit, like softball and soccer and things, they were fine, and I didn't really feel as big of an impact there. But things are finally starting to ramp up. We got 4 press passes to go down to Arlington for the Big 12 Media Day soon, so that'll be happening. And from what I've heard, it'll be back to normal here in the fall for the most part.
Are you going to try to get into football? Are you going to be on that beat or somewhere in the fringes?
I think what I've been told is I'll be kind of writing primarily. Last year I covered soccer, and I really like that beat. I've never returned to a beat, so I feel like it'll be cool doing all the Zoom interviews now to finally come in to a beat with some prior knowledge and have rapport and relationships built up. So I said I don't necessarily want to completely punt the soccer beat, but I also would like to go in football and get in Boone Pickens and cover some of the games from the press box instead of the stands, because I wrote articles after every football game, but they were from the stands. So what I'll be doing is kind of splitting my time between football and soccer this semester. And then since I'm able to split my time, I think that'll help me get on the men's basketball beat, because with the overlap between football and men's basketball, sometimes it's hard for writers to like primarily do both. So I think if I'm only a little bit in football, when soccer will wrap up, and I think that'll maybe clear the way for men's basketball later in the winter.
You ever had a sports assignment, Michelle?
No, I've done features where I interviewed athletes,
Okay.
but I've never actually covered a sports match of any sort. I've taken photos of things here and there just when I happen to be there.
Tailgates and whatnot.
No, I actually took some pictures of baseball players when I was down at a tournament one time.
Okay.
When the Cowboys were playing down in Frisco. So I do things like that, to try to help out every once in a while. Took pictures of the Coyle football team for the sports department last year because I needed the players' headshots. That's as close as I've come to covering sports. I always like to think that I could jump in and do any beat that I needed to do. Sports, I would struggle. It would show. If you tried to throw a gamer at me, I would have to get someone to explain the game to me first.
Right.
So that would be kind of a tough one.
Yeah, I had little knowledge of soccer, and when I was in Durant, sports editor there, it was just another thing I had to cover. But I think it was, I don't know if it was my first or second year there. I covered one of the games. I had very limited knowledge. Like, I could tell you who was scoring or assisting or, things like that. But one of my gamers led to my first writing award, which
Really?
How about that?
so something
Oh, wow.
I had very little knowledge of. But, you just sort of cover the highs and lows and take it to a very personal perspective. Like if you can sort of find that angle, right? It's always about finding an angle that other people don't have, right, Sam?
Yeah.
So it's still just telling stories, but it's backed up with, it's in a framework of statistics, I guess, right?
And that's the difference I'm finding is, for a lot of gamers I've written maybe early in the soccer season or early in the softball season, a lot of times there's only the Ocali up there because, we have 3 times the work staff of anyone else, and we can send kids to any game, and it's all about experience. And then you can kind of write whatever you are the reporter for that game for everyone. But then I guess when I'm covering, I covered a few men's basketball games last year, or covering writing an article on March Madness, or writing an article on the Softball World National Championships. When you have 7 other people writing stories, there is that added, I don't know if it's pressure. I like to think of it as a challenge a little bit to be unique and come up with maybe an angle that no one else is focusing on. Like you said, Beau, those words of wisdom you dropped, that's why I got this internship.
Right.
But to hear a little 15 seconds worth of advice like that'll be one I file away.
Now, I actually do have a question about that, Sam. What have you learned over the course of your internship? Like, how have we changed you, Sam?
Wow. Well, I've learned how to work a Keurig machine. Can that
Very
be
good.
Right.
That's up there. Because
Let's be clear. He's not doing coffee runs.
No.
He
No,
was
oh, yeah.
making coffee.
I can
for
see how that
himself.
would be misconstrued. Yeah, I've
Right,
only done
yeah.
it for myself. Yeah, I can see
Yeah.
how that would be misconstrued. Really, I feel like I've learned to take it super broad on y'all. I feel like I've really learned a lot. Just because and I say, my experience built up. Like you people have to realize that's maybe 16 months worth of writing. And I remember my first article I ever covered, I wrote it as one big block, and my beat reporter, who's now works with my brother in Guthrie, he's like, hey, you gotta hit the paragraph and hit some enter and put some breaks in there and stuff. So I went from that, and but even after a year and a half, and I'd written a couple news stories, but I hadn't really learned how to cover a community so much, because I think where I've come in is you look at the schedule and you're always told, all right, you're going to be covering something on July 16th, 18th. There will be a press conference on the 25th and a doubleheader on the July 31st or something. And it's pretty stringent and structured. And I love sports, so I've always kind of had that idea in mind. But now getting into a thing like this where I'm writing some sports articles, but I'm writing some news articles. I think I've learned how to branch out and write articles about septic tank systems, or I'm writing an article now on a nonprofit in Stillwater, Books Over the World, that delivers books to Tanzania. So whether it's how to go to a city council meeting and cover that, I wouldn't have known. And it's a lot of times just a simple question of, hey, Beau, or hey, Michelle, how do I do this? And it's not a 5-length paper that I have to dissect to learn it, but I had to learn it nonetheless. So I feel really comfortable now after this summer of covering anything instead of just a sporting event.
You don't. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, well, I was just wondering. I mean, do you feel like that will enrich your writing? I mean, that you do within sports.
Yeah. See, and that's sort of the point. Once you sort of smooth out those writing chops and sort of build that muscle memory, it kind of opens you up to a lot of different things, and I think it makes college a little bit easier. Especially when you get to term papers and things like that, it becomes a little easier for you.
And I guess the thing I've really liked about this summer writing is in covering sporting events, you have exactly what to write. You have to write about the final score and the key plays and things. But if you're told, hey, write a story about this nonprofit, there's no structure, there's no thing to watch, and the score after the first half and who scored and what. You have to almost collect the whole story and decide what's the best way to tell it. So I feel like that's where I've learned so much. I can't really break it down into a sentence, but just talking in the newsroom with people, or hey, how do you recommend telling this, or how do you recommend transcribing this hour and a half worth of quotes? Just little things like that I pick up tips from people who have been doing this for a lot longer than I have, just about how to approach telling a full story.
And at some point, I mean, every sports writer writes a sports feature. I mean, and as you said, you're finding those human stories that are on that framework of the statistics. So, I mean, this can probably help with that, I would think. Although, I mean, you have a knack. You tend to look for that. We can see that in your writing. The details, the things about, the smell of the chocolate chip cookies, I mean, you try to include those things in a way that not everybody does. And I do appreciate that. We've had people who came to us from sports media and they interned in the newsroom. And I always feel like I can tell a difference anyway when someone's come in from sports and they haven't done a lot of news writing, simply because, like the breaking news is kind of a tough one sometimes for people.
Right.
I mean, it's a tough one for everybody to kind of get used to, and you got to scramble and you got to figure out what's going on, but we kind of like that. We like that little bit of adrenaline rush. But I mean, when you're on sports, like you said, you've got your schedule. It's announced a year or 6 months in advance. I always say, you never have like an emergency baseball game that breaks out down the street that you have to run and cover.
Right.
So it makes a difference in, how you look for news, and I think how you respond to news. I think you'll probably have a little more ability to do that quickly on the fly now.
It's great to go offbeat. I'd suggest that for any young journalist. And, speaking of sports and statistics, I have an old baseball quote for you, Sam, and I wish I could find. I knew off the top of my head who said this, but I'm pretty sure it's like an old broadcaster. It was, some people use statistics like a drunk uses a lamppost for support and not illumination.
I like that.
I've never heard that, but I like it.
That's awesome. That's a good quote. Some people use statistics like a drunk uses a lamppost, not for illumination, but for support.
You got, I think you even actually got the quote a little more accurate than I did.
Well, I'll tell you, some of the best sports stories I've ever read, and some of my favorites aren't about a game at all. They're about, and I think those are the best stories of whether you're writing about, in my experience, a book a book shipper in Stillwater that ships to Tanzania, or the local tennis coach. You want to tell the human elements, and that's my favorite part to telling any story is asking about those small details of, hey, I heard you had a cooler. What's in the cooler on the softball decks, or I guess how much does a book cost, or what's your favorite type of book to ship over? And there's so many examples. I read a story last night about Josh Hamilton, who's one of my favorite players on the Texas Rangers, who struggled with cocaine addiction and stuff, and I wish I could say it ended on a high point, but it ended on a low point. He didn't turn. He turned his life around and then relapsed and stuff. But it was a sad story to read about that. Or a hockey dentist that fixes players' mouths after a puck comes through them and things like that. Those are the stories that really stick in my mind, and they probably didn't have a single score in them.
See, and that theme, I love that. The hockey dentist. Like, I would read that all day long. I would, and I'm not necessarily a sports person or someone who follows a lot of sports, but I would read a story about a dentist who caters to hockey players. I mean, it's sort of like when we had a story, that was focused on Joe Exotic.
Oh, yes.
And we had a reporter at the time who had grown up in that area, and he had contacts. He interviewed Joe Exotic's hairdresser, and I'm like, that's exactly the person I want to talk to.
Right?
That's who I want to hear from, is the person who created that do. So it is those things that are really fascinating. And I think that they, they cross the spectrum. They're going to attract readers from all across the board. All kinds of people will read those stories.
So Michelle,
yes,
you had a really interesting, do we call it a press conference, Zoom conference?
Yeah, it was a press conference through Zoom.
Yeah, there was still opportunity for Q&A, but it was some officials within the State Department of Health and people who have worked on the pandemic response. And it's sort of an interesting time because a lot of times we like to think we're post-pandemic, but they're kind of worried about the Delta variant and other variants. But what were the highlights of this press conference?
Well, I think the headline from this is that, people may have felt like it was over, like we turned the corner and like we were getting back to normal. We cannot get complacent. That is really the thing that people need to be aware of. The other thing is that the vaccination rate has really kind of stalled out. And that's a big source of concern it probably should be a source of concern for all of us, but definitely for state health officials, right? The press conference was with Colonel Lance Fry, who is the state health director. And then it was also with the director of the public health lab here in Stillwater, and with an epidemiologist and with another official from the health department. And, they were talking a lot about vaccinations, really. As I said, the vaccination rate has kind of stalled out. Basically, the easy gains, the low-hanging fruit, all the people who were anxious to take it, they've got it now. So now what we've got people who either, for whatever reason, no one should be able to say that it's not available to them at this point. That was the other thing they said. It is widely available. You should be able to find it somewhere very easily, and you're not going to have a long wait for an appointment. But you have people who have not taken it and are choosing not to take it. And, the idea is that there are perhaps a couple of reasons. There was a discussion about whether some people are put off by the idea that it's still under emergency authorization rather than full FDA approval. Although both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines the applications have been made for that full FDA approval, and Pfizer has actually submitted an application for study of booster vaccination even. But I think a lot of it, to be honest, in my personal opinion and just what I'm seeing, is that a lot of it's ideological, whether it's, distrust of the government, whether it's, for whatever reason.
Like they can't be wrong about what their initial thought was,
right,
when the pandemic started.
Or someone who's so married to a point of view that distrust of the vaccine or minimization of the threat of COVID has become almost like an article of faith for them. And then there might be some other people who just honestly feel like an article of faith for them is just that they're going to be protected if they do the right things. There are some people who think that if you eat healthy and you take the right essential oils or whatever,
Well,
that it can't get you. There are other people who just
Yeah.
think that Jesus is going to protect them. I mean, there are so many reasons that someone might feel like they have some other form of protection besides a vaccine to rely on. I will tell you that the state health officials are very concerned that the variants, as they become more and more transmissible, they're easier to transmit, and they make people sicker. And that is really an important thing for people to know. There have been a handful of breakthrough cases. They are currently studying breakthrough cases in people who were not vaccinated, but who contracted COVID and recovered. And there are some people who are getting infected again. And that is just starting to be tracked on the national level. So hopefully within a couple months, there'll be some reports on that. But basically, numbers are going up. Oklahoma is a hot spot. We are right next door to Missouri and Arkansas, which are hot spots. Eastern Oklahoma in particular is a trouble area right now.
I wonder, is there specific data to how much longer immunity lasts for people who have actually been infected and for people who have been, immunized with the vaccination?
Oh, you mean whether
just
you
for how-
acquired it through
yeah.
infection or
Right,
whether through
yeah.
vaccination? I don't think there have been any studies about that, and they didn't discuss that today. Now, there has been some discussion that I've seen, in other reports about the impact, the theory anyway, that people who contract COVID-19 and then get vaccinated could have very strong immunity for a very long time. There is the idea that that could be a very beneficial thing, or provide close to lifelong immunity. So, I mean, we'll see. The thing is, this is a new thing. This is a new virus, and we're learning how to deal with it. And one thing that Colonel Fry did say is that we're going to be dealing with this. People don't need to think that COVID is going away. New variants will come. As we have these outbreaks, it just makes them more likely, because the more people who get it, the more chance it has to mutate.
Sure.
And so that's just a new variant.
I would think the rates we have suggest this being more seasonal, than something we could eradicate, especially if so few people are willing to sort of lean into this herd immunity idea,
Oh, well, and he flat out said it's going to be like the flu. We're
Yeah.
going to be dealing with it every year. And one of the things they noticed is that our numbers are ticking up a little bit, but they're about where they were last June.
Mm.
And so we had like a kind of higher numbers in the spring, and then it kind of got lower, and then it went up in the winter. And I'm pretty sure, I'm sure they're going to be tracking those patterns as well. We may see seasonal patterns in this.
Michelle, that was such a great summary. I almost feel like you're maybe even one of the people up there on the podium. So I'll turn it around. I don't know if it was at a lab or a hospital or a conference center where they do those press conferences at, but I'll turn it around to you, and I feel kind of bad for asking you a question because you were the one asking the questions, but maybe you'll know. You mentioned it does feel like there's kind of a certain bit of apathy now, because really either you've gotten it or you don't really want it, because it's really widely available. Do you think that with this new Delta variant coming, and how I saw Tokyo, Japan kind of declared a state of emergency just a couple weeks before the Olympics with the Delta variant, and I feel like COVID, maybe it was a little bit of, I'll use another analogy. There's a theory called voter fatigue in the MVP, where people were sick of giving it to LeBron every year, so they gave it out to different people in the NBA. So I feel like people were so sick of talking about COVID, and obviously with the vaccine and stuff, it all kind of happened where I feel like we got out of this state of COVID really fast, and it kind of fell from the media cycle a little bit. And then that's when I almost feel like people really had, a sense of apathy toward the vaccine, or, either you've had it or you don't. So I wonder if this Delta variant brings it back into people's minds and things like that, then we could see those numbers tick, or do you think it's still kind of solidified where people are pretty set in their ways?
I would say that actually the term COVID fatigue was used several times today in the press conference. So, I mean, there's no doubt that has settled in. People are tired of hearing about it. They want their lives back. That's really what it is. And one of the things that, all the officials kept really hammering was, if you want your life back, if you want your kids to go to school in the fall, if you want to go sit in the stands at a football game and watch your kids play football, If you just want to be able to go to the grocery store and not have to worry about someone coughing on you or, or what they're coughing on you, get vaccinated. That's really what it came down to. And the sense I got from it is that people are not worried enough about the Delta variant. They're not nearly as worried as public health officials are. And they would like to raise that level of alarm a little bit. They would like a little more awareness. And not only that, but, I don't know if you were in the newsroom yesterday, but I saw that there's another up-and-coming variant now, the Lambda variant, that is starting to move across the world. So, the Delta variant is not the last one. And the more people who contract the virus, as I said just a couple minutes ago, the more chance there is for this to mutate and the more variants we'll have. And eventually, a variant will develop that is going to be able to find its way around the protections provided by our current vaccines if we're not careful.
I think,
and that's really what they're worried about.
My suggestion is after we move away from the Greek alphabet, because we run out of those, we start to name variants after state lawmakers.
Ooh,
how's that?
I think that sounds great.
But it's interesting that you bring up Tokyo, because it's a good example that in the United States we just have this manufacturing machine, and we have all the science, and we have the ability to where it's widely available for us. Even in Japan, where it's pretty high tech, the vaccine was not widely available. It's like we're that fortunate, and we're still not taking it.
And there are countries where people are begging for the vaccine, and we're sitting there going, nah, and we just got it sitting around.
Or India, where they, where their hospitals got slammed, and
exactly,
and they were saying, hey, we're going to get you, 4 million vaccines, and they're like, yeah, there's 1 billion of us here, or more. So, yeah, it's wild, and here we have it. You could probably walk down the street.
Absolutely.
Just about anywhere.
You could probably walk into any drugstore in Stillwater and get it within 5 minutes. And there are people who would be thrilled to be in that situation. And I get it. I get that people are nervous about things and it's new, but it's not that new anymore, is it? That's my thing. It's like you're not in the first wave. If you get the vaccine now, even though it's still under emergency authorization, millions and millions probably 1 billion people have been vaccinated at this point. And, we've had a very small number of, things that could be identified as potential side effects that are occurring in people who, who have been vaccinated. But, we were talking about that earlier. Like there's a small number of young adults, say, who are developing a condition called myocarditis, which is an inflammation around the heart. Now, these are young adults who have been vaccinated, and they have developed this. Now, again, correlation doesn't mean causation, right? So just because it happened in a population that was vaccinated doesn't necessarily mean the vaccine caused it. And I personally have not looked at what the statistics are in terms of young people who might have developed that condition anyway. What percentage of the population develops that just across the board? You've got to look at some of that stuff.
Well, even in a macro sense, like there are 4 million dead from COVID that can be tied directly to COVID out of
the size of Los Angeles,
the
size of the city of Los Angeles.
So our death rates at first were between 2% and 5%, and when it became treatable, it dropped to about 1% of people infected. But still, that's so minuscule compared to vaccination rate plus and divide that by side effects when you think about the tens of millions of people who've been vaccinated.
And one thing that is very clear is that a vast majority of the deaths and the hospitalizations are people who have not been vaccinated. There's been a small handful. They said there were 14 people who had been vaccinated who died from COVID or from medical conditions associated with COVID. All of those people were older, and all of those people had multiple comorbidities. So these were people who were already at the very, very highest risk.
I'll tell you something I would read is if someone could go and just, I know it would be anecdotal, but if you could just go and trace how much of the, not even hesitancy, but denial sort of sprang through wellness community and it's the alternative medicine community, right? I'm really curious to like how people, they jump from this, like they start following a Facebook page about essential oils or whatever, and they just, the algorithm pushes them into more and more dangerous misinformation, and they start sharing it that way. So that I would read that, definitely.
It's really odd to me too how a desire to be very, very healthy can lead people to deny the information that is being shared by the healthcare system, by and by scientists. Of course, you're right. I mean, some of this does come from the more alternative perspective, where maybe people feel like, that the medical industrial complex is just trying to make money off of us or something. I mean, I think there are people who definitely feel that way, and they want to avoid, their idea is you maintain your health. You don't wait till you get sick and go get some kind of medication. And that's a great idea. I mean, honestly, the healthcare system would love for you to do that. If you would talk to anybody at Stillwater Medical Center, they would say, do that.
There is these, like, those are people I don't think anyone's going to win over,
Right.
But there might still be a percentage of people out there who are just kind of scared, and maybe you can sort of win those folks over.
And they are hoping that final FDA approval might make a difference for those people who are just waiting, to see if something terrible happens, just waiting for that full approval. Like, they don't feel the vaccine's been fully vetted yet because it was, pushed out relatively quickly, or actually very quickly.
Right. I wonder how many of those kind of spikes we could see of, whether it's COVID entering the news cycle or the FDA declaring it, fully out of the stage of, kind of rushed. You use the correct word. I forget what it is. A little while back, Michelle. But I wonder how many of those spikes we could see where more people, a group of people, get comfortable with it. But I'm curious, how would you describe the overall mood of that press conference then? Would it be optimistic or wary? What would you, if you had to boil it down?
A level of frustration about the vaccine hesitancy. I would say that. And I got that from both the reporters and the officials who were being interviewed. And they're just, they just hammered it over and over again.
Well, how much do you think is still a little of this political hedging? Like they still don't want to talk about anything being potentially mandatory or, vaccine, what do we call them, passports and those kind of things. That they're still not willing to freak out the squares, so to speak.
Okay, big time. Yeah. There's still a big political element to it because every time one of the reporters would ask if there'd been any discussion with the governor's office about requiring something, they would say, oh, well, we really feel people need to be able to make their own decisions, but boy, we sure wish it would be to get vaccinated, I mean, they would urge people, and they continually said, we would urge people to do this. We're practically begging you, please, please, please do this. But then when it came right down to a question about any kind of a mandate, bringing back the emergency orders, requiring masks in schools, anything like that, there was a big step back. There is no appetite at all for any type of a requirement, for sure.
Wow.
And that's political. We know that.
And the thing I don't know if I'm ready for is just to gird our loins for another battle with misinformation, I just don't know if I'm ready for that fight again. It felt like so much of our time was spent just battling misinformation.
And it's exhausting because it's like trying to hold back the sea, isn't it? It's like, okay, Sisyphus, get ready to start pushing that rock.
Okay, well, we look forward to it. That'll probably do it for us today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the newsroom. Thank you for joining us in the newsroom. Look for Studio Stillwater wherever you find your podcasts. Find archived episodes on stwnewspress.com.